So I had a chance to observe your reading for meaning lesson the other day, and as you reflected back, how do you feel about the lesson went?
Overall, I think it went well. I think I definitely was more cognizant of the student talk time and having them share their thinking in terms of what they thought the lesson of the story was. I was kind of giving them the strategy of really like how good readers notice the character's actions and the response to another character's actions and using that to help determine the lesson. They kind of more just, went off of their own thinking, which was great, and I think they built off of one another, and that was definitely a benefit for them. And once they kind of originally they were like, we really don't know, and I was like, well, let's think back to the whole story, and I definitely did have to stop and do some recall and retell, which I kind of predicted we would have to do, and kind of reviewing. And I think we did spend a little more time than I had anticipated on reviewing, our past knowledge of, what's going on in the text, what have we been thinking about this story, what are some of our jottings that we've had so far, and so we had to kind of reread and get their heads back into it, so that way, which I think was necessary in order to, make that inference about what the lesson of the story was. But I do think that through student talk and through their turn-in talk, they were able to develop lessons that were applicable to the story and lessons that were based on the characters and their actions.
Okay, great. So, they were able to use their own thinking, but they kind of veered off a little bit from what you had initially planned with using the characters.
Yeah, which I don't think was that big of a deal. When I modeled, I specifically was like, oh, well, I'm noticing that this happened between the two characters, so that's making me think the lesson is, and that was my think aloud, and they didn't really do that in their own thinking, but their own thinking was based on text evidence, and so that's, more what I was, looking for, so just saying, well, the lesson is to be kind to others and to accept others, and they knew that was the lesson because in the story, the girl is excluded, which I think, that is a character action. They just weren't able to, explicitly, state it as, I did in my think aloud. But, so yeah, they were still able to in that way.
Good. All right, so I took some data for you. So I did, note that there was, 5 minutes where you just reviewed from the previous lesson,
I know, and I felt like I was like, oh, this is going so long, but I guess I had to.
Right. So I didn't break that down into teacher talk or student talk, and then you had your modeling, so you can just take a look at that, and then I have the questions that you asked me to
great,
teach.
Thank you.
As you kind of look over everything, is there anything that stands out in particular?
I'm definitely glad to see that there was more student talk time, especially during the guided practice portion of the lesson. I think that was definitely helpful, and they were able to build off of one another. And it is interesting that we did have to go back and recall okay, so what have the characters done so far, why did they do that, what's happening in the story, so I guess, and going forward, I think that this is something I probably should have been we had practiced getting the gist and we did a lesson on it, but kind of just keeping that more consistent maybe on our post-its. We were doing it verbally every day, but I think maybe if we would have been holding on to bits and pieces, short little summaries, that might have been more helpful, and we wouldn't have had to have that whole big discussion about what has happened so far, to kind of get their thinking going. But and then I actually, at one point, I really wanted them to come to the understanding that one of the lessons was don't be a bystander. And I was like, okay, so, like, what has Maddie done or not done? And I had to, I was, like, trying to really, like, but they couldn't, like, come to it on their own. But they did find their own lessons within the story, just not that one. But I thought, like, you know, if they were able to, like, think back and think to the characters' actions, they could have gotten to that lesson. But...
So, like you said, like in the future, having them keep track of their thinking more like chapter by chapter, like just short summaries,
Yes.
So that they could kind of go back.
Yeah, I think maybe if that would have been in place, like I said, we were doing it verbally, but if I could have had them jotting those short little gists as we went, then maybe they would have went back and been like, oh, in this chapter, Maddie stood by and did nothing. Like, then what they could have. So that's definitely something going forward I would implement.
And then in terms of your questioning, how do you think that went?
I think I did good in terms of modeling my thinking and saying, you know, I'm noticing the text it says, and this makes me think the lesson might be. So I thought that was some good think aloud talk. Let's think back to some of Maddie's actions. Based on these actions, what do you think the author's trying to teach us? So I think I was using some good questioning in that way. To kind of like, let's get them to start talking about what they think. And I think I was able to reinforce that during like my conferencing with each of them. Like, oh, I like how you're using the text to help you come to your understanding of the lesson.
And then you had wanted them to like to turn and talk, and you did have them do that in the lesson. Did you think that went well? Would you change anything about it?
I know. I felt like they weren't super... and it's so different because it's just like the two of them and then me. And I'm like, okay, turn talk. Like, in my own classroom, it's so much easier because everyone's talking. And then, so I think they were like hesitant, and I probably, in the beginning, like thinking back in the beginning of our tutoring, I probably could have, you know, I don't know, I guess like set like more clear expectations of what a turn and talk is and what should look like. And I mean, they're in middle school, so I kind of, I guess, assumed that they might already know, but they were able to, and they would like talk and share one lesson that they thought of, and then they would just like kind of stop talking. So I guess like if I could have had a way to kind of further their talk, or I mean, I kind of tried to jump in with some questions to get them to continue to talk, but it wasn't like this like consistent conversation that I had hoped it would be, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I'm trying to think in the future, like,
is there anything you can think of, like, moving forward
to help
build that?
Yeah, that conversation. I guess, like, maybe I could have done talking stems, like, sentence stems to help them, like, okay, so when you're turning and talking, like, these are some sentence starters for you to help keep the conversation going. I think that would have been beneficial.
Good. So, like, in the future, using those sentence stems
to
further their thinking, to get them talking a little more.
Yeah. I think that would have been helpful.
So overall, you think the lesson went well. The girls did, you know, while it was a little limited, they did turn and talk. They did build on each other's ideas, which was something that you were hoping that they would do. They were able to come up with their own, you know, lesson for the story, and you were happy with your questioning.
Yeah.
So I guess just like moving forward, is there anything else you would do differently, or in terms of
just like we had said, like really setting up more clear expectations for the student talk time, because like, you know, if that is my goal, I need to like really build that sort of like set it up so that they're going to be successful in their talk. So using sentence stems and like maybe modeling it, like like what a good turn and talk looks like, and when you're talking about a story, like what are some things you should be talking about with your partner. So I should like probably incorporating that, so that way when it comes time to turn and talk, they have a better understanding of, you know, how the conversation should go. I think that'd be really great to use.
All right.
Yeah.